Testing 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. I'm calling this meeting to order. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Ginsburg. This meeting is being conducted as a virtual and in-person meeting, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Green? Ms. Ginsburg?
Here.
Ms. Martin? Here. Mr. Rue? Mr. Jones?
Here.
Okay. Mrs. Me?
Here.
Mr. Gatto? Mr. Fay?
Here.
Okay, staff participating in the meeting include the following: CIO John Grable, Deputy CIO Jude Perez, Principal Investment Officer Scott Drazel. We have Amy Boris, the Executive Director of CII, as our guest speaker today. Trustees, please raise your hand option to be placed in the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mic until you're ready to speak, and now we may proceed with the agenda. Mr. Green has arrived, so Mr. Green, we're just going to go ahead and we can do the minutes if you like, or we can go ahead with the presentation. The agenda is right.
Yeah, we need a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting, yes?
Yes.
So moved.
I'll second it. This is Liz.
Okay. Mr. Green?
Aye.
Okay. Ms. Ginsburg?
Aye.
Ms. Martin?
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Also, we have Mr. Jones participating virtually. Mr. Jones, can you confirm if there's anybody over the age of 18 with you?
No, there is not.
Okay, thank you. And we don't have any public comment today. And
Okay, without any other delay, we can go into the presentation, please.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome. Good morning, committee members, trustees. Welcome to the first meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee for the year. We recognize that we have a lot of new trustees and committee members around the table, so we thought we would take the opportunity today to level set some background on LACERA's corporate governance efforts, including a guest speaker from the Council of Institutional Investors, the Executive Director Amy Boris, with whom we collaborate quite regularly to advance sound governance practices, both within portfolio companies as well as in capital markets. Before I hand it over to Amy, I'll try to cover some basic slides that go over the guiding policies that LACERA set in place related to corporate governance, some of the strategies that we pursue to try to put principles into practice, as well as just cover a few points on how we've historically tried to collaborate with peers to amplify our voice, including through organizations and associations like the Council of Institutional Investors. Some of this material will be familiar to folks around the table as it borrows and echoes from materials that were in the trustee orientations, but we'll just use this as an opportunity to make sure that we can level set. Let's go to slide 3. And Cindy, if it's possible, I'm happy to guide the slides.
Oh, no, she hasn't done it. Ask her to just move it.
Great. Let's just go to slide 3 then. Thank you, Cindy, for guiding the slides today. Okay, so on slide 3, trustees will note that our approach to good corporate governance is really guided by our mission to produce, protect, provide the promised benefits to our members. So LACERA has recognized for many years that corporate governance failures like Enron, WorldCom can have a detrimental impact on fund performance. The fund has also recognized that good governance, like ensuring robust independent oversight, independent directors on corporate boards, can help oversee risk on behalf of investors. So LACERA has had a long focus on trying to advance good governance, which is incorporated both into our investment policy statement as part of our investment philosophy and strategy, as well as it's spelled out in LACERA's corporate governance and stewardship principles that are linked here and are really set by this committee and approved by the board. Let's go to slide 4. The corporate governance and stewardship principles further break down the fund's positions on common topics that come up in corporate governance. We categorize them into 5 areas. So that includes our position on advancing strong board quality, such as ensuring robust board independence, financial reporting to encourage companies to provide reliable, comparable, timely financial information by which investors can analyze financial performance, a number of encouraging robust investor rights, as well as touching on a variety of E&S issues that can impact firm performance, like encouraging companies to have constructive talent management practices to recruit, access, motivate, and engage their human capital. These principles then, if we move to slide 5, we work to put those principles in practice through a variety of strategies highlighted here. We'll touch today on some of those strategies where we work with CII. It includes voting proxies. We retain our voting rights at 97% of our global equity portfolio. We're voting in over 60 markets around the world. Typically over 7,000 meetings come up, particularly from the April to June season when most companies hold their annual meetings. That touches on a lot of core aspects like selecting which directors we think are suitable and serving investors' rights, but it also touches on shareholder proposals. Shareholder proposals are only 2% of the individual items that come up, but often are novel or new topics that investors are putting forward to suggest new practice or to request a company to disclose more information about a business risk so that investors can assess that risk as part of their investment process. We work with CII to collaborate with other investors to encourage fair rules by which the SEC allows for investors to present proposals like that. We also advocate policy with our policy advocacy, submitting comment letters both to suggest new regulatory rules as well as to weigh in on rules that have been proposed. And often that's in collaboration with CII. Let's go to slide 6. We've been members of CII for a couple decades now, and Amy will go over the history a bit, but this highlights some of the core areas that we've collaborated. First and foremost, as the committee is aware, the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ have listing standards. The SEC has basic rules for publicly listed companies, but by working through CII, often we define what we consider best practice that goes above and beyond those minimum requirements. So by way of example, in Delaware corporate law, where many public companies are incorporated, has a plurality vote standard for corporate directors. That means whoever gets the most votes is seated. If they're not opposed or contested in a director election, even if a majority of investors oppose that director, they're still legally seated. By working through CII, investors suggested a majority vote standard by which by which corporate directors should achieve at least 50% of votes in order to recognize that they're serving investors' interests. That's not a legal requirement or a regulatory requirement, but a practice that was spread through collaboration with organizations like CII. Mentioned the public policy advocacy, and then often we're involved in participation, leadership, so forth. Trustees have historically attended roundtables. John Grable is currently serving on the U.S. Asset Owner Advisory Committee, and I believe was appointed to the vice chair position this week. And we've also served on the board in a variety of capacities. So pleased to move to slide 7 and introduce Amy Boris, the executive director. Amy has been with the council for about 18 years. First as deputy executive director, and more recently as the executive director. She has a history as a business reporter and steers all operations, strategy, and advocacy efforts for the council on behalf of its members. So welcome, Amy, and I'll turn the mic over to you.
And it is on, I think. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. It is an honor to be here and a real pleasure because, as Scott noted, LACERA has been a member of CII for more than 2 decades, and not just a check-the-box member, as Scott outlined, a very much an active member, and co-signing letters with us and attending our events. But I am most grateful for LACERA for sharing its staff with CII in leadership positions. Dale Johnson as board treasurer, and Scott also as board treasurer, and then board chair, and of course, John Grable as on our advisory council, one of our 3 advisory councils, our most important U.S. Asset Owners Advisory Council. And as Scott said, our board this week met to appoint him vice chair. So thank you for, you really are remarkably well served by a high caliber staff, and we've benefited from that. So thanks very much. Could we go to slide 2, please? So I'd like to talk a little bit about what CII is and does for those who may not be that familiar. We are a Council of Institutional Investors is based in Washington, D.C. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit association that was founded in 1985. And for 39 years, CII has been a leading voice for strong shareholder rights, good corporate governance, and what we consider sensible financial regulation that fosters fair and vibrant capital markets. Our core members are U.S. institutional asset owners, about 130 in all, and with combined assets of about $5 trillion. And they're primarily pension funds. Our core members are public funds like LACERA, but also union funds, other employee benefit plans, state and local entities that invest public assets, and a handful or so of foundations and endowments. It's a diverse group, public union corporate retirement systems in red, blue, and purple states, from Hawaii to Florida and Texas to Massachusetts. But they have diverse investment philosophies and approaches, but they're all fiduciaries and invest money for the long term. And with a duty to protect the retirement assets of really literally millions of workers and their families. And for that reason, CII promotes policies that we believe enhance long-term share owner value. We also have about 170 associate members, and that includes non-US asset owners like British Columbia Investment Management, Norges Bank, and the giant public pension fund of Japan. And we have a lot of the people organizations that manage your money are our members as well. We have more than 75 asset manager members, including the big 4 indexers, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and Fidelity, and then a whole slew of active managers from AllianceBernstein to Wellington. You can see a breakdown in the pie chart that's on slide 3. If you could change to slide 3, thank you. Just briefly about CII's history, because we were founded right here in California by a handful of visionary public pension fund leaders, most prominently then California Treasurer Jesse Unruh. And they thought institutional investors needed to use their collective voice at public companies in their portfolios, both at portfolio companies and with regulators, chiefly the SEC. If you think back to the mid-1980s, it was the era of imperial CEOs, swashbuckling corporate raiders, and using greenmail to get rich. And just to give you some reference, greenmail refers to the practice of buying a block of stock in a company to threaten a takeover and get the company to pay a premium to retain control. The raider makes a killing, but the other shareholders, public shareholders, miss out. And it's pretty much illegal right now. But back then it wasn't. And within a month of CII's incorporation in 1985, the markets were roiled by a controversial greenmail plan at Phillips Petroleum. So those initial 21 CII member funds held meetings. They held swing votes in this decision. They met with both sides and individually rejected the proposal, forcing the company to modify its approach. Again, our 21 founding members were diverse, but they shared a basic belief in 3 principles that still guide CII's policymaking and approaches today. And those are that investors benefit when corporate boards have robust oversight and effective oversight of management, when directors are accountable to shareholders, and when financial rules protect investors and ensure that important information gets to the marketplace transparently and quickly. They also believe that investors are more powerful when they speak with one voice. And lastly, that investors are not monolithic. They have different investment cultures and philosophies. And so that it makes sense for CII to focus on areas where there's consensus among the membership and focus on big tent issues. And that's pretty much what we've always done. So if we could move to slide 4, I'll talk a little bit about what CII does on a day-to-day basis. And it's really three areas. The education of our members and the public is a key focus. So we have a weekly electronic newsletter that keeps members up to date on corporate governance developments and trends and what's happening with financial regulation and legislation. We host about 2 webinars a month for members. I recently hosted 2 myself on speaking to both sides of a proxy contest that will be decided tomorrow at Norfolk Southern. But we have webinars on all sorts of issue topics as well. We publish reports from time to time. 3 years ago, when there was an explosion in the special purpose acquisition companies, SPACs, we did a guide for our members on things to consider before investing in SPACs, pointing out where there were loopholes and gaps in transparency. Some of these things eventually became incorporated into the SEC rulemaking on SPACs. We have a podcast called The Voice of Corporate Governance. It's actually ranked first. FeedSpot ranks it #1 in the corporate governance list of podcasts. And most importantly for education, this is something for you all might want to consider. We have a partnership with NYU Law to host Corporate Governance Boot Camp. It's a 2-day program on the NYU campus. It's an introductory program first day and then delves into more topics the second day. You can take it for one or both days. And it's a mixture of academic instruction and panels with instruction by practitioners. It's been very, very popular. For many funds, though, the most valuable aspect of CII membership is our advocacy. And Scott mentioned some of the things we do and some of the things LACERA has done in tandem with CII. No fund on its own is big enough to move the needle on proposed legislation or regulation that could benefit or harm investors. And that's what we do. And frankly, some funds aren't comfortable speaking out, but we are, and that's kind of what we do through meetings with legislators and commissioners at the SEC and the other regulators or their staffs. Last year, we filed more than 20 comment letters on proposed regulation and legislation. And we do meetings. I know some trustees and staff have gone with us to the Hill, where we take members once a year to Capitol Hill and to the SEC to meet with policymakers. We have an annual letter campaign asking boards to consider shareholder proposals that receive a majority of support from shareholders to act on those proposals. We think that directors are the first line of defense for shareholders, and directors represent the shareholders. If a director fails to receive majority support, that director should tender his or her resignation and not serve. And so we have followed up at companies where either directors don't receive support or a shareholder proposal does get majority support, and we urge the board to adopt the actions of the shareholders have asked the board to take. On rare occasions, we file amicus briefs and in matters that are being litigated. I know that LACERA has joined us on at least one, and we've been pretty successful in speaking for shareholders, the voice of shareholders in those matters. Our advocacy is grounded in our member-approved corporate governance policies. Our policies are, it's kind of a comprehensive body of best practices. Over the years, we've developed this and refined it with member input and approval. Policies are carefully vetted, both by the Policies Committee of the board, the full board, and the members get to weigh in and vote. So this is not something that comes from staff. It bubbles up from the membership. We also have policies on other investment-related issues besides corporate governance, such as investor expectations of newly public companies, and sustainability performance, corporate disclosure of sustainability performance. We don't opine on pension fund governance or anything to do with defined benefit plans. That's really the purview of the National Institute on Retirement Security, kind of a sister organization that CII helped to seed and we still support through a membership. Our policies are, as I said, are benchmark best practices. They're not binding on our members, whether corporate or investors. Most of our investor members, like LACERA, have their own voting policies and make their own voting and investment decisions. Lastly, we offer lots of opportunities for members to get together, to engage and learn from each other. Most prominently is our 2 conferences a year. We have one in the spring, always in Washington, and the fall is an away game. It kind of moves around from year to year. Last fall, we were in Long Beach, California. This coming fall, we'll be in New York City. We always have a private trustee dinner at the first night of our conferences where there's discussion groups. And I know trustees in the past have attended, and I encourage you all to mark your calendars for September 9th to 11th for the conference and September 9th for the trustee dinner. You'll all be getting invitations. Our conferences generally attract about 500 attendees and have speakers on a range of issues. And we've had folks like General Motors Chair and CEO Mary Barra, SEC Chair Gary Gensler, and Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan. We have 3 advisory councils where members can share information as well. John is on one of them. We have 2 others for associate members. And I've already mentioned our trustee events. Although CII doesn't, at one time we did trustee education, but we've focused more on corporate governance education more recently. But we really, we understand you all have an important role to play to safeguard the retirement assets of LA County workers and families. We think as an organization, we have a duty to help you do that through our organization by being a resource on corporate governance and investment issues. So I do encourage you, if you have any questions at all, at any time about corporate governance or shareholder rights, to email me or anyone on the staff. We're a very small team of 10. And we'd like to hear from our members, so we're happy to answer questions. Could we move to slide 5, please? Thank you. So CII has weighed in at critical junctures in the past to promote key reforms, and I thought I'd talk about 2 of the most important in recent history. Since the 1980s, a large body of empirical evidence, empirical research has emerged that links corporate governance practices, best practices, to long-term share owner value. And that's actually been acknowledged recently, even by 2 Republican-appointed SEC commissioners. There's really not much doubt anymore that adopting corporate governance best practices can drive long-term share owner value. And we just have to look back on events since the turn of the century to realize how important this can be. The early aughts were marred by a torrent of corporate scandals at companies like Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, and Adelphia. In nearly all these scandals, a contributing factor was lack of oversight. Practices such as weak board oversight, abuse of pay plans, and high-handed CEOs, what some dubbed chief ego officers instead of chief executive officer. There were record bankruptcies and huge earnings restatements, and thousands of people lost their jobs. These scandals, impose real costs to investors like LACERA. By one estimate, shareholders then lost more than $230 billion in just 20 US companies at the time. It was clear that many of the problems were systemic and that oversight by corporate boards, by regulators, auditors, investment and commercial banks, law firms, had failed. So the response in Washington was a package of sweeping reforms that went into what was called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. It's greatly improved financial reporting and strengthened oversight of the audit profession through the creation of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. CIA had a major role in, or played a role, I shouldn't exaggerate it, but we did have a role in pushing for these reforms, in organizing our members to get as a sounding board and meeting with lawmakers and their staffs to try to push forward with some of these. And I have to say that Sarbanes-Oxley has been very successful. In a couple of years after it was adopted, restatements plunged, maybe 20% in 2 years. And since then, we have not had a string of corporate frauds the way we saw around the turn of the century. Just a few years later, maybe more familiar to you, was the global financial crisis of 2008. And that revealed critical gaps in US and global financial regulations and an enormous toll, financial and in lives of people. And one economist estimated that the crisis cost $15 trillion of losses. Once again, our organization, working with members, stepped up to make sure that investors' voice was heard when policymakers were meeting to decide how to clean up the mess and what to do next. We convened investor members and joined forces at the time with the CFA Institute to create the Investors Working Group. This was an independent panel of experts led by 2 former SEC chairs, one appointed by a Democrat, one who had been appointed by a Republican. And they had several months of deliberations and produced a report that we published calling for numerous reforms to fill gaps in government oversight of the markets and to improve the governance of US public companies. Many of the group's recommendations were adopted in what became the Dodd-Frank Wall Street, I always forget the long title, officially it's Dodd-Frank Wall Street and Consumer Protection, Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, just Dodd-Frank is easier. But some of those, that we personally pushed for requirements for advisory shareowner votes on pay, so-called say on pay, and policies to claw back unearned compensation for CEOs who were given incentive pay, but it turned out they didn't hit their numbers. So ensuring that there's a baseline clawback provision. More recently, if we could go to slide 6. Thank you. More recently, CIA advocacy has helped to improve corporate governance, not by pushing necessarily for changes in market reforms and financial regulations. Sometimes we can do that, but sometimes we can help make improvements by pushing through better practices at companies, one by one almost. And Scott referred to the work advancing majority voting for directors. And if you think back to in 2005, most US public companies used the plurality standard. They didn't elect directors in uncontested elections through majority voting. That year, CII launched a letter campaign. We wrote to 1,500 companies, US public companies, asking their boards to adopt majority voting. And we kept at it. We tracked responses, we had meetings, and many of our members did the same thing. And today, 90% of the S&P 500 do use majority voting in uncontested elections. Similarly, we advocated very vigorously for directors to stand for election annually. At most, again, maybe a decade or more ago, most large US public companies had staggered boards, or also called classified boards, where a portion of the board was elected for 2 or 3 years, and instead of standing for election annually. And we believe that annual elections help keep directors accountable to the share owners, the folks who elect them and to whom they're supposed to represent. So we and many of our members, have pressed through share owner proposals seeking this reform, us through dialogues and other means. And again, today, at 90% of S&P 500 companies, all directors stand for election annually. So these are sort of now regarded as the norm, but they were considered, out there at one point, even 10 or 15 years ago. More recently, CI was the force behind giving share owners real choice in voting when there is a contest for board seats, a proxy contest. And this is reform commonly known as universal proxies. But let me just explain that until 2022, at most US companies, if there was a proxy contest for board seats, shareholders had a choice. You could vote for the nominees listed on the board's proxy on the company's proxy ballot, or you could vote for the nominees listed on the dissident shareholders ballot, but you couldn't mix and match. You couldn't pick from both. And for the directors, the combination of directors you thought best represent your interests. And universal proxy did that, made that possible. We petitioned the SEC back in 2014 for universal proxy cards that would require each side to list all of the candidates. And in 2021, the SEC finally adopted that reform. And, today, if there's a proxy contest, you get to choose. If you think about it, in the past, it was kind of like going into a voting booth and your choice was you can only vote for Democrats or you can only vote for Republicans. So now you can choose. And I would say that the business lobby did fight us for this pushback for a long time on the assumption that this would lead to an explosion in proxy contests at companies and threats, activism. And that really hasn't happened in the first year and a half of universal proxy. The rates of proxy contests are pretty much what they always were. I think we've talked about clawbacks already. That's on that list. So why don't we go to slide 7, if that's okay? Great. CI's advocacy is focused in 3 buckets, as always, pretty much. Investor rights and protections, corporate disclosure, and market structure and integrity. There isn't time to talk about all of these. In fact, am I running out of time, Scott? Should I? Okay.
You're okay.
So I wanted to focus on one that's really been a signature issue for CII and that LACERA has been very actively involved in, and that's the equal voting rights at U.S. public companies. When an investor holds equity, there's value at risk. So investors expect the ability to vote on key corporate matters like selecting directors to represent you or executive compensation. And we believe that equal voting rights, one vote, one share, is a bedrock corporate governance practice. When a company goes to the public markets to tap public investors for capital, those investors should have a right to vote that is proportionate to their equity holding. A single class of common stock with equal voting rights also ensures that the board is going to be accountable to all the shareholders, not just some. And I think you may know that 9 in 10 U.S. public companies do have equal voting rights, but increasingly, or more recently, at companies making their IPO, founders have been insisting on multiple classes of capital shares with differential voting rights. Typically there's Class A shares with maybe 10 votes per share for the founder and perhaps some insiders, and Class B shares that have 1 vote per share for everybody else. This lets founders wield control far beyond their own equity stake. And they essentially control the board because really the board can't be elected without their say-so. And over time, this company, to their credit, founders say they're doing this because they want to make sure that they have the time they need, the freedom they need to realize the vision for their company without interference from activist investors or folks like you. But over time, we found that this research has shown that this founder knows best philosophy and approach can entrench management and blind executives to the need for change when a company is underperforming. So, and some empirical studies have shown that there's actually a premium discount over time after several years of IPO. The benefit of being of having dual class shares fades away, and it comes to hurt performance. So that's why we pressed dual class IPO companies to include reasonable time-based sunset provisions in their governing charters. Since 2017, we have tracked IPOs. This is all available on our website. It's publicly available. We track IPOs every year, look at how many have dual class stock, how many of those companies have adopted time-based sunsets. It fluctuates from year to year, but we've been encouraged that we're seeing more. In practice, we're seeing more sunsets become the norm, at least for dual class companies, and reasonably timed sunsets. In the past, you'd see a sunset maybe of 20 years, and now it's more like 7 to 10 years. So we think we're making headway on that. And we're very grateful that LACERA has joined us in a partnership with called the Investor Coalition for Equal Votes that is engaging IPO companies to encourage them, both here and in the UK, because we have a partner, a UK partner in this, to make sure that they have sunset provisions in their governing charters when they go public. So lastly, slide 9, if you can, thank you. Just quickly what we're watching. There are some clouds on the corporate governance and shareholder rights horizons. Demands on boards are increasing. There's now cyber risk. Now there's AI risk, and there's, of course, climate risk and the rest of a lot of risks that just weren't on the board's plate many years ago. This puts a premium on having good disclosure of the skills and experiences of the directors in the boardroom. So we push for that too. We're also a little worried that boards may not have really robust management succession processes and plans. We're pushing for more disclosure about that. The reason is we've seen a boomlet in the past few years of what's called boomerang CEOs. These are at companies where the CEO may have retired but is called back because there wasn't a good succession plan. You saw this at Disney with Robert Iger, and twice at Starbucks with founder Howard Schultz coming back twice to be CEO. Investor rights are also being challenged as the backlash against ESG, maybe not here in California, but elsewhere in the country, is emboldening companies to push back on shareholder proposals. So most recently, we've been dismayed by ExxonMobil's decision to go to court to challenge proponents of a shareholder proposal that asked the company for more information and for more information about its greenhouse gas emissions, but also to accelerate its reduction in greenhouse gas targets. Now, ExxonMobil took these proponents to court even though they had withdrawn their shareholder proposal. And why we're concerned is really twofold. First, the SEC has a long-standing process for companies to appeal, to try to exclude proposals they believe encroach on ordinary business rights of the company. And by and large, I think CII and many investors believe that the SEC may not get it right every time, but for the most part, it's this process called the no action process has been a fair arbiter. And we do worry that a court, and in this case it's a court in Texas, may a court ruling could really upend that process and make it more difficult for shareholders to file proposals and get them to a vote on company ballots. So we're watching that very carefully. But on the other hand, the ESG backlash has also prompted companies like asset managers like BlackRock and others to offer their clients more what's called pass-through voting. Clients in pooled funds now have the ability to take back their vote, take back their shares to vote them themselves or vote a different voting policy than the asset managers. We're seeing kind of experiments with this. Don't think it applies to LACERA because you vote your own shares using your own voting policies, but many others don't. I'll just close by noting that, I think important, I think folks in California follow climate disclosure, battle over climate disclosure rules pretty carefully, and we are all watching what may happen to the SEC's very mild disclosure requirement over climate risk and opportunities. It's bottled up for now in the courts, but meanwhile, Europe and California are requiring more fulsome disclosures of investors and companies, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Investors are hamstrung when they don't have consistent, reliable, and accurate, comparable disclosures to make sure they have informed voting and investment decisions. So I think that's probably enough for me. I'll stop and I'll be pleased to answer any questions. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I have some comments. Thanks for the presentation. CII, I was able to attend the conference in Long Beach. I do want to bring awareness to my fellow trustees that one of the things that came out of the luncheon is you guys are self-funded now. If I'm remembering that correctly, you guys are able to keep the lights on and it's all done internally. Is that?
Well, it's because members pay due. A large part of our budget comes from member dues. So yes, we are quite well funded through member dues and conference. At the conference, our attendance fees paid by associate members and sponsorship.
And it's yeah, it's good. Necessity is the mother of invention. We've got Mother's Day coming up here, and I do feel that I believe in the mission. In my short time on the boards, I've been exposed to numerous challenges from Wharton with and exposed investors in all areas with the challenge of bottom line increases versus DEI and other and corporate governance, and even to a point of how dare you as a fiduciary not go after the most money, regardless of the impact to environment or human capital or anything like that. I mean, between the corporate governance conversations and AI, I don't know what's being talked about more, but I think the mission that you guys go after is extremely important. I think it is being fiduciary responsible to address these governance issues for the long-term investment of any fund, and taking care of the individual. Basically, it really is. I see, my understanding is that these involvements legislatively and everything else are really to take care of the LACERA member that worked 20 years and puts money into the fund, anticipating, expecting that return, and supporting us. I encourage all of our trustees to get involved with CI. It was very impressive. I really appreciated the dinner and the discussions we had with other pension funds. It was eye-opening, and being around peers and hearing their position on things was, I think, a really good experience. So, yeah, that's pretty much the comments I have. I really appreciate you taking the time to come here. Does anybody else have anything to say on?
Yeah, Chairman Green, I've got something for you. Ms. Burris, the question I saw it noted in the presentation about, and I was trying to refine it here, about trying to get better transparency for, say, skills and experience matching of directors to kind of the perhaps the sector or macro environment of the companies through there. Could you expound upon that a little bit? I mean, I'm not sure if I'm necessarily aware. I'm sure a director gets elected, there's a nice kind of bio about his or her background, but is there an additional level of detail that is exposed for shareholders to look at that's perhaps more detailed or acute in kind of the skills or experience match from that perspective?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the question. Yes. So CI has always supported disclosure of board diversity in the broadest sense: experiences, ethnicity, race, history, skills and background. But increasingly, our members are asking boards to provide skills matrices and other more detailed information about each director, so they can see and to talk about what that director or nominee brings to the board, what skills, experiences brings to that company at this particular time, given the company's strategy and its needs. There has been a lot of interest in making sure that the folks around the table have the right skills, have the right backgrounds. So our members, through shareholder proposals or dialogues, are pushing for that. We're providing a forum for that. But we've also supported, for example, NASDAQ has proposed a listing standard that would require its listed companies to disclose the diversity of their board members. How many are female, how many are people of color. And we supported that listing standard, and it's being challenged in court. And we filed an amicus brief in 2022 to support that. So we take our commitment to disclosure very seriously in different ways at different levels to back that up. But you're absolutely right. There is growing interest in making sure that investors have granular information about directors who serve on corporate boards, so that they can judge for themselves whether this board has the right combination of skills and experiences and backgrounds to push forward the strategy that the company says it's embarked on. So thanks.
Another follow-up for you, if you don't mind, Amy, is there much research out there when you look at the nominating committees for these boards that kind of says, do they have the opportunity to kind of operate from an optimum mix perspective, saying, hey, we need, this many industry insiders, but we also know that having people from adjacent or different industries is also important to the overall performance of a board. I mean, have we gotten to the level yet where there's kind of a somewhat of a consensus about what type of mix an optimum board perform? So gender and race is one thing, but I'm just thinking more along, whether it's sector experience or even age, right? Like, is there some research that seems to support that boards on average that have a average age, average, whatever else to there tend to perform better? It's a total nerd question, but just curious if you've seen any exposure or anything that talks about kind of board makeup at that level.
No, it's an interesting question. And I should, a couple things. First, I should say that we don't, as CII, we don't tell boards you should always have 2 of this, 3 of that, 4 of that, whatever. That's why the boards have a nominating and governance committee. We hope they do their job, and we encourage boards to disclose as much as they feel they're confident about what they're looking for. But there are, I don't know of any studies that show that boards with this kind of composition or that kind of composition are best in class. There is research, though. Spencer Stewart does, and annually they do a board index of looking at the qualities or characteristics of S&P 500 boards. They slice it and dice it in all different ways. It's very interesting to see how things like age have changed over time. And I've noticed that some boards have, because some boards were getting long in the tooth, not necessarily in age, but just long-serving directors,
Right.
That a number of boards, I think Microsoft is one, have been officially or unofficially trying to have a mix of directors, some long-serving, some who've been there maybe 10 or more years, some middle-range servers, and have some that they're refreshing or bringing in new directors. So they have a mix in terms of who serves on the board. So some companies are adopting that strategy. But, you don't want to necessarily say all boards should look like this, because there are different sectors, there's different industries, business changes, and you have to trust that hopefully the directors that you all have voted on at companies in your portfolio are the best in class for that board at that time, and trust that the board does periodically does a robust job of evaluating the directors. Some boards bring in, periodically bring in someone from the outside. They do 360s. They interview everybody. They do very robust board evaluations. I will say that even with all that, it is still, we hear it's still very difficult for a board chair to say to an underperforming or director, or someone who maybe has been there a little too long, no longer contributing as much, thank you for your service. Our needs have changed. We need to make a change.
Right.
So change on boards is slow. It's why you see more boards maybe adding a director or two rather than switching somebody out necessarily, because it's awkward.
Thank you.
I might chime in with the permission of the board that just to share LACERA's policy perspective as adopted by the board is, we do call on companies to articulate their strategy to create and sustain value and identify risks that could impede their ability to sustain value, and then cast a wide net for a diverse mix of professional backgrounds, skill sets, experience, a variety of diversity attributes that match that business strategy, and to describe in their proxy statement how the board nominees that are being put forward for us to vote on match that desired skill set. I'd say historically, maybe 20 years ago, the emphasis is on just moving to independent directors. Then we kind of got more robust descriptions of individual directors, CVs and resumes, all very impressive. But kind of the question would be, how do they come together to really meet the needs of overseeing business strategy or mitigating risks to that strategy? And I think, as Amy's pointed out in slide 9, the business world has become more complex. There are more complex, risks like, geopolitical risks, cybersecurity. So how do you kind of tap into some skill sets, not by having a single issue director, because it's a fiduciary board. We kind of want a mix, but we want companies to better explain why the skill sets of the nominees collectively match the needs to oversee the business strategy. In terms of the question on relationship to financial performance, I think on some of the mechanics that Amy spoke to on like staggered boards, we have seen empirical evidence that over time, companies with poor mechanisms on electing directors can underperform. So by advancing good governance that goes above and beyond regulatory requirements, as long-term investors, as a pension plan, hopefully we are encouraging practices that are in the interest of the membership, as Chair Green mentioned.
Just one of the things that came out of the super investor, we had a think tank breakfast on it, and then that it was extolled that they're with diversity addressing, modernizing, updating their software. They do see an increase in performance, and what happened in France with like a legislative consent decree to meet the bar, set a bar, which they said was unattainable for women in these positions. It ultimately went through, the bar was met, and it actually helped with the bottom line. So,
Well, Europe has, tried to move, focused on quotas more than U.S. has managed to have more diverse boards through practice.
and LACERA is seen as a leader in the
Yes.
without having to have legislation for
And
it.
it's I think this is a reform that has advanced because investors like LACERA and some of your colleagues, fellow boards, fellow funds have engaged with portfolio companies to push them to have more diverse boards.
And we might have
Quietly.
one more question.
Ms. Trustee Nee?
Yes, I know we're running out of time. Good morning. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I did a corporate governance certificate in UCLA Anderson Business School, so I do helped me have the appreciation of the subject. So and then also appreciate the discussion on DEI. I totally agree. So it's a diversity in the skill set, background, perspective, right? Those that help the company, the business to thrive. So I know it takes a lot of effort to get to today. It wasn't like this before, and today we see more and more diversity in there. So thank you for the leadership there too. I heard that you have 10 staff. I was like, wow, that's a powerhouse. 10 staff and do all the work that you just present here. That's amazing. I do have one question quickly. I just wonder if multiple members of CII invest in a company, if you, during the monitoring, right, if we observe that the board is losing the independency. Maybe the management team, the CEO gaining more and more control. Is this some action that we would do together, or is upon the individual investor to make sure we have more influence there?
Right. It's a really good question. And CII itself doesn't lead engagements with companies. We did in the past, but increasingly our members do that on their own. And often members work with, work jointly with others to do that. We are a forum for that, though. We have a listserv, we have a proxy voter group that meets, and other forums where like-minded members can talk to each other and hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What are you working on? And we do have members working together and writing to companies together. Our asset managers tend not to do that, but our voting members are public pension fund members. I think in California, we've had a number of funds that have written to companies in California to push for more board diversity. But you're talking about a problem with there's underperformance.
Because it's very important for a board to be independent from CEO, from management team.
Yes.
Because they represent, the shareholders' best benefit. However, the management team sometimes could make decision that is not in the, shareholders' best interest. Like what you said, sometimes ego, sometimes other personal interests get into the way. So sometimes when board, they lose in the independency, the management team does worrisome, right?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it gets to the point where the company's underperforming so much that a shareholder nominates his or her own candidates for the board. And we've seen we've seen quite a few examples of that this proxy season with shareholders. And CII can be a forum for getting the word out to members. So we had a couple of webinars where there were proxy contests at certain companies, and we heard from the dissident candidates as well as the company's defense of its company's own board, talking about in defense of its own management. So we kind of are a forum for both sides to get their views across.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Trustee Fay?
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the question that I have is more involved with like the tectonic shifts. We talked about Sarbanes-Oxley, we talked about Dodd-Frank. So I see a lot of this stuff is very good because it's incrementally making us better and making us more transparent. But what do you see on the horizon for things that can be literally like the tectonic shifts that we would need to be watching, and how are we trying to get ahead of those things? Of course, the fact that once you do so, we wouldn't see the problem thereafter. But what are the issues that you would see coming up that could be really scary? AI and ESG, those are really big items, but in terms of like things that are like specifically within corporate governance, that could be a problem.
Do you mean trends that could that boards are going to be grappling with, or threats or challenges to corporate governance and shareholder rights?
That boards will be grappling with.
Yeah, I think geopolitics is a big one. Right now, it's huge in coming from many different areas, and I think many boards and CEOs are struggling with how much to say or not say. Anything they say, their views on different sides. Your customers, your employees, your clients, your suppliers will all have different views, and it's not easy. It is not an easy time to know what to say. And increasingly there's a shift in a generational shift, and younger workers, it seems, increasingly expect they want to work for a company that they think shares their values, and they want management to speak out. But there's there are risks to that, because there are different views, then not everybody has the same views. So I see boards and CEOs struggling. I do worry that there was after the last election, there was when there was push against efforts to suppress votes or voting rights, there were CEOs who spoke out about that in a nonpartisan way, but they did speak out and backed efforts, and they got soundly pummeled for doing that. And if there are efforts like that in the future, I think boards and CEOs be more circumspect, and that's may not be very helpful.
That makes sense. I guess is the question that would then become, how would CII help put together a stance or a thought on that? Because everyone will have their own different opinions on whether it's young people wanting to be in a place where they represent, or voting suppression. Like, what's the way to get in front of that? That could be helpful to all the rest of, whether it's guidance to CEOs and management, or to within us, we need to say that we can back something if we believe it in our policy statement.
Well, CII is a nonpartisan organization, and we try to stay within our swim lane, which is investor rights and corporate governance. So I don't see us making policy along those lines. What I do see is that we could be, again, a forum for different perspective to speak about that. And we have at our conferences recently, we've had sessions discussing the backlash on ESG from both, the pro and con. It's a little touchy. We have to be careful. We are a big tent organization with members from states where there's a lot of pushback. West Virginia, Wyoming, Texas, Florida. So we don't wade into those issues directly, but we do try to provide a safe space for members to hear from all sides.
I'll maybe just chime in that part of the equation, I think, for CII is just helping companies establish good governance mechanisms by which they have policies and practices in place to define how to take a position or whether or not to speak out, and often do so with one voice. You don't really hear corporate directors speak individually on matters. If a company speaks, it's really with one voice. But I am mindful of time, so I'll turn it back to the chair as we.
Thanks, Scott.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Thank you so much for the presentation. Looking forward to attending the next CII conference and whatnot. Yeah. I don't know about boot camp though. I already did that once. There's a lot in the title.
It's not as scary.
It's not as scary as it sounds. Yeah, right.
Moving on.
Sure. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for listening.
Any items for staff review, future review for the committee? Okay. Future agendas. Go to the order. Mr. Jones?
No, other than a motion to adjourn, just setting the meeting for to start at let's say 9:10. Quick turnaround, allow you guys to hit to the break room for cookies and donuts, and we'll start promptly at 9:10.
And coffee.
Yes.
Trustee Fate? Ms. Ginsburg? Ms. Martin? Ms. Meek? And I have nothing other than apparently 2 hours and 15 minutes is not enough time to commute 67 miles. So first day as chair, I was late, but yeah. That's right. Can I entertain a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.